It's 1 year ago this month that we lost our dear friend Jean Weston. For those of us who were here in the beginning, we know. For those of you who are new to the congregation, you may not know. So I have a handout. If you don't have one, Steve will provide you with one. If you raise your hands and, teachers, handouts.
Are we going to be
No.
tested?
No test. I thought it might be nice if those of you who are newer to the congregation could at least see who Jean Weston was. And while Steve is handing those out, I will apologize ahead of time for my less than wonderful skills with the computer. I'm still a dinosaur. I still do cut and paste, literally cut and paste. I'm sure there were some of you out there who might have been able to arrange this much better. Jean and her husband Bill joined the congregation in 1991 as charter members. Bill was our early historian, and Jean our hospitality diva for many years. She always said, "Food is my ministry." In fact, I think that was a bumper sticker that she had. But food was only part of the story. Quilts were her other passion. There was always a quilt in progress at Jean's house. "Here," she'd say, "come and look at this." Inevitably, it would be a work in progress pinned to a large black felt fabric which was hanging on the wall in the downstairs hallway. Sometimes she'd ask for an opinion as to what she should do, and then other times she had already made up her mind. I can almost never remember a time when there wasn't a quilt or pieces of it, or when that black felt was empty. Jean was a machine quilter. It always amazed me that she could work with such large projects on a sewing machine. I'm a sewer too, but I can't imagine manipulating that large amount of fabric on a little tiny sewing machine. Interestingly, she didn't do hand sewing very much, and often she'd ask me to sew on a hanging pocket or a made by label that she couldn't do on the machine. We often traded off work. She'd do something for me on her serger, and I'd do something for her by hand. We'd laugh over her stash of fabrics. There were very few that she could resist. In fact, Lila said, those were the biggest bills left on her credit card were to fabric shops from all over the place. It was true, she probably had several lifetimes worth of fabrics. But she produced hundreds of quilts. Many, for her family, were the practical kind, to be used on beds and to keep people warm. Of those practical quilts, those that kept folks warm, she made one each month for the newborn center at Geisinger, and for several years she made 2 per month, one for Geisinger and one for Evan. And she made them too for newborns in this congregation. Some folks may be recipients of those. But her other quilts are what I call her art quilts, those that were purely for decoration. I'm the proud owner of 7 of those quilts. I know, and I cherish each one. How did I get so many? Well, Jean was a yoga student of ours in the early days of our business, and we had a yoga space with a great deal of empty wall space. She could not bear to see all those empty walls. They were just crying for something to put on them. Thus, we had several quilts that would never have worked on a bed, that we hung on our walls for a meditative focus or just for the beauty of the piece itself. She shared her creations with everybody, and what creations they are. I have 2 that are especially meaningful to me. Bright Blessed Day, and Dark Sacred Night. These are companion quilts. They are inspired by the lyrics of the Louis Armstrong song, It's a Wonderful World. And I say to myself, it's a wonderful world. That little number. I confess that I didn't ever think I'd be able to use Bright Blessed Day. She gave it to me for one Christmas. I would like you to just imagine opening a box and seeing mostly the center of that quilt. All those purples and oranges, it literally made my eyes hurt. Not an exaggeration, not figurative. I took it home and said to Carl, I just don't see this one hanging anywhere. However, I was wrong. Hanging on a wall in a large space, it is simply glorious. She always told me that of all her artsy quilts, that this is the one of which she was most proud. I don't know how she managed to sew it without going blind, or at least dizzy. And I really invite you all to try standing close to that and just imagining the kind of work that it must have taken. I'm not the only recipient of Jean's handiwork. At her memorial service, almost every pew in the chapel was covered with one of the quilts she made for her children, her grandchildren, other relatives and friends, and that was only a sampling of her work. She quilted on a smaller scale as well. Besides the baby quilts, she did table runners, placemats, jackets, and any other item you could imagine in fabric. Need a prize for a casino event? Whip up a table runner or two. Need a hanging for the gay pride service? No problem. Not only people, but places have her art. The chapel has two. The one chalice behind the lectern, and the other that I call the stained glass window. And I confess that's the quilt I lust for, that stained glass window that's on the side wall. And Geisinger also has two of her quilts proudly hanging in their library. The other amazing thing is that she never did the same quilt or prepared the same meal twice. Bill used to tell the story that if the kids and he ever wanted her to make a dish the second time, they would say to her, well, it was pretty good, but you might be able to tweak it a little, because they'd never see it again. Those of us who were blessed enough to go to her Tuesday night dinners used to try the same trick. It was the same with quilts. No repeats. She loved sewing gadgets. Not sewing gadgets, but sewing gadgets. That's probably why she and I had so much in common. Gadgets were our thing. My favorite story is one from her daughter, Lila. Jean called Lila and told her that she just got a new attachment that would sew on feathers. What would Lila like with a feather on it? Nothing, Mom. I don't want anything with feathers on it. Jean, yes, but if you did want something, what would it be? How about a pillowcase? But you'd have to wash it inside out. And Lila's response was, Mom, I don't want anything with feathers on it. Then, about a dozen years ago, Jean started using a marvelous computerized addition to her quilting, which allowed her to embroider various designs onto her quilts. Well, she was off and running. She started embroidering just about everything. Jean had measured Jim, her son-in-law, for a shirt. A similar conversation ensued that she had with Lila. Jim, what kind of Celtic motif would you like embroidered on it? She asked. None, thanks. Really, I don't want any, said Jim. Jean made the shirt, and when Jim opened it up, he saw a Celtic wolfhound embroidered on a small tag on the inside of the shirt. UUCSV gave her opportunity to use her embroidery and her computer skills, much of which we see every Sunday and probably don't pay any attention to. Here on our table, the runner is one of Jean's designs. But what started me thinking about Jean and her quilts was a request that would explain just what it is we see that's hanging here. Each piece has its own special meaning for me, and I hope after the explanation that they'll have a greater meaning for you. As you know, this is not exactly a beautiful church space. Jean's quilts are an attempt to bring a bit of what I call stained glass to an otherwise uninteresting area. So you have the pamphlet in front of you with Jean's picture on the front, and I'm going to start with the Spirit of Life quilt that's, as I said, it's much better if you get a chance to see them up close, but I also thought if you had something in front of you, you might get a better idea of some of it as we were going through them. She said that the Spirit of Life, the song, was the closest thing to a prayer for her. She loved the words, she loved the meaning. And her use of lilies as flames tie to our chalice. She also has a butterfly motif as well as the flame for the roots and the wings. And as I said, since I'm still a dinosaur in the techno world, I could not do justice to her quilts with my photographs. So it would be worth your while to check them up close. On to the panels. These were made for our first gay pride service that we hosted here at UUCSV. I don't have the panels on there. I couldn't figure how to paste them in. And they were easier to let here. You know, and to have the handout have symmetry. I couldn't get those on. But you can see them for yourself. I believe it was Anne who asked Jean for something special to represent the rainbow for the first gay pride service. As in typical Jean style, she had to make it with a bit of a twist. The colors are not your conventional rainbow, but then Jean was not your conventional woman. So these are her interpretation of gay pride banners. I can't help to think of them as kind of a rainbow in a minor key. The piece that has all the religious symbols on it, she did to represent the traditions that inform our faith. These are the sources from which we draw Unitarian Universalism. They're the ones that are listed on the back of your bulletin toward the bottom, not this handout, but on your Sunday bulletin. They list all of those sources from which we do draw our tradition. This is the quilt over here that many people ask about because they're unfamiliar with the symbols. So I've decided to let you know what the symbols are all about. And really, they are much more beautiful up close. And they're embroidered with the magic embroidery from the computer. So starting in the upper left corner, this is the Buddhist wheel of Dharma. The wheel has been used as a symbol for the concept of Dharma since at least the 3rd century BCE. In Buddhism, Dharma means cosmic law and order, or right living. And it's also used as the word to name the teachings of Buddha. The Dharma is his teaching. It is a broad meaning for Buddha's philosophy. It also means cessation, as in the end of dissatisfaction, which is the purpose of the Buddha's teaching. The next center top is the Star of David. I was interested to find, because we are most familiar with that, I was interested to find that it didn't become representative of the Jewish community until it was recorded in Vienna in the 17th century. It was not always exclusively the Jewish symbol, and then in the late 19th century, it became more widely accepted as the symbol for Judaism and representative of it today. The next in the line is the triple goddess, the 3 faces of the moon, the maiden, the goddess, and the crone. It's used to represent neo-paganism. Robert Graves, an early 20th century poet and mythologist, is given credit for popularizing this symbol. It's hard to think of it as just becoming popular here at the end of the 20th century, but it is. Now, the second row on the left begins with the Hindu symbol of Om. The actual parts of the symbol are formed by 3 letters of the Sanskrit alphabet, A, U, and M. These are the beginning, the middle, and the last letter of the alphabet. Usually we just go, Om. But if we were working hard on it, and I don't always, it has 3 distinct vocalizations. I'll give it a try. It would be Om. So you'd get the A, the U, and the M. The Buddhists believe, or that the Hindus also believe that this is the sound that the universe made as it was exploding into being. The central symbol is our own flaming chalice. This was created in 1941 by Hans Deutsch, a refugee from Nazi Germany, as a symbol to help persecuted Czech Unitarians. It was rather like the drinking gourd for the Underground Railroad. It was used later in the war effort to save Jews. It was adapted by UUs as its symbol, by UUism as its symbol in 1962. And what surprised me was that it was only formally recognized by the U.S. Armed Services in 2006. So, you know, we've made it into that group of being recognized. The next is the Taoist yin-yang symbol. This represents the primal, opposing but complementary forces found in all things in the universe. Depicted as it is, it also outlines the necessity of balance in all things. This is in constant flow, according to the Taoists, and sometimes we have more yin or more yang. When the yin and yang are out of balance, evil occurs, and when in balance, harmony exists. By the way, the yin is the dark side, considered the feminine side, and the light side is the masculine or the yang. On the bottom row, we have the Islam star and crescent. This symbol is or sometimes a combination of it, was found across the ancient Eastern world as early as the 6th century BCE. The symbol emerged into popular use during the 19th century as a symbol for the Ottoman Empire. And of course, we are all familiar with the Christian cross. Early in Christianity, the fish symbol was used, and the cross became identified with Christians around the 2nd century CE. And then it became more widely used as their identifying symbol from the 3rd century on. And just to note, for some people who may not be aware of differences, a cross with a body on it is called a crucifix, as opposed to just a plain cross. And the last block is the earth-centered tree of life. The tree of life is an important symbol in nearly every culture. With its branches reaching into the sky and its roots deep into the earth, it dwells in 3 worlds. It's a link between heaven, earth, and the underworld, uniting above and below. There is an enormous amount of information out there explaining the tree of life and its importance to almost every single ancient Aboriginal culture. Just Google it. It's astonishing. That could make for an entirely separate sermon on trees of life. So now when you look at that, you know what she's got up there. And of course, I think you can notice that her little chalice is all around the side, and her chalice here with the flames that come up the side. Chalices were a big thing for Jean. She put them on lots of things. The quilt farthest to your left is Jean's statement of belief from her participation in the Building Your Own Theology class. And a note to anyone who takes Building Your Own Theology, as you can see, your statement of belief doesn't have to be a written one. It can be something artistic, poetry, all different possibilities. There are 2 symbols that inspired her belief statement: the symbol for Reiki, That's the kanji, the two Chinese symbols, the one on the top and the one on the bottom. The one on the top is rei, R-E-I, meaning universe or universal. And the ki on the bottom, similar to qi in Chinese, meaning energy. So Reiki is the symbol of universal energy. It's also a healing modality that Jean was a second level Reiki practitioner and did some Reiki for Bill when he was ill and for some other people too. I explain Reiki, for those who don't understand it, as a kind of Japanese version of laying on of hands. That sense of drawing that universal energy. Actually, Reiki's become more popular in the second half of the 20th century. Some hospitals even use it in their emergency rooms. They have Reiki practitioners. Now, the other symbol is called the particle and the wave. This is a concept from quantum physics, which I am totally unprepared to be able to explain. Ask Scott and my husband. Balancing my checkbook is so quantum physics is far beyond my abilities. But if our old friend and mathematician were here, Dave Forgash, I'll bet Dave could explain it to us for a long time. And we probably still wouldn't understand it. But he would. So you're going to have to do with my simplistic explanation of it. I know that Jean felt that energy and matter were interchangeable and that we are all part of this flow of energy and matter. And there's my quantum physics for you, that flow of matter becoming energy and energy becoming matter. If you want to know more about it, try reading The Dancing Wu Li Masters. That might make it much clearer too. You know, often I would take Jean for her appointments when she was getting ready for her surgery, and we'd talk about how we perceived ourselves as being reunited with this energy flow after we died. So she did that many years before she was having her surgery. This was, as I said, early on when she did her Building Your Own Theology class. There's Jean's theology on the wall. So, this is our artistic, cultural, and symbolic heritage. These are not just run-of-the-mill, factory-produced quilts made by businesses to decorate church walls. These are works of art, created with love, just for us. No one else has them. No one else ever will. When you look at them in the future, remember, they were made for UUCSV by a talented and remarkable woman. May we always find a place to hang them so that we will be reminded of her and her love for our congregation.